an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty, Book 3, The Veiled Throne, Chapters 12, 13, and 14. In these chapters, man, that was too close for comfort. Thera would have married somebody. She wouldn't have married. She would have been put in a real fucking awkward position if it weren't for this guy's mother coming to speak with her. I was so worried, y'all. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Hi, Kyle, if you're out there. Ms. T is here in the chat, letting me know if she can and cannot see me. Apparently, my camera is very faulty today. These chapters, I really was getting so frustrated because I thought we were about to watch Thera get the surprise sprung on her at the altar, so to speak. I was just thinking, we're being set up to know what's going on and watch her not know. I am so grateful that he doesn't do that. Because while her not understanding the reality of the situation because of the translation issue is understandable, if you lean on this that much, it can feel kind of cheap that nobody has happened to say anything that would tip her off. And he managed to make the dialogue that sort of dances around the issue. He made it feel natural enough that I didn't have a problem with it. It wasn't like contrived too much, you know. But because I was so sure that we weren't going to find out, or she wasn't going to find out the truth until the actual moment, I was sitting there wondering, are we going to have a big confrontation because she realizes what she's done? Is she going to go through with it anyway because she realizes the price that she has to pay here? Because I genuinely didn't know whether or not she might just go ahead with it. You know, like that is historically what princesses and queens have done. And while I knew that she had started to develop actual feelings, I was like, I mean, yes, but also how much does that really matter? And initially, you know, he thinks it doesn't seem to matter to her at all. But eventually it turns out that that's actually a lot more important to her than I was sort of expecting. I knew that it was of some importance. We know Thera enough to be aware that she's an emotional being, you know, not to say that that's at the expense of logic, but she certainly has a heart and cares about people. So I knew that she did care for him, but I wasn't really sure whether or not she was the type to just totally set that aside in the interest of the practicality of what the moment required. And I wasn't sure, if she didn't know until that moment, how she could possibly get out of it without causing like deep offense in a way that could be fatal to her and all of her people. So all this to say, I am deeply relieved at the way that this winds up, but I really, for a minute there, was starting to freak out. So, all right, let's start with chapter 12, because I'm talking about everything that happens when they get to this little settlement, a sort of oasis, really, but we are not even there yet. So, chapter 12 starts off with, the world had shrunk down to the patch of tan earth that could be seen at her feet, framed by the black cowl of her robe. One step, another. Thera had lost count. Though the sun had barely risen, they had already been walking for hours, it seemed. The heat was making it hard to think of anything beyond putting one foot in front of the other. She had to start counting again. Every 1,000 steps, she would allow herself 1 drink of water. That was the rule. The water skins on her back, so full when they had set out, lay flat and empty. She hoped that she wouldn't have to change the rule to 2,000 steps for each drink, though it might come to that if they didn't get to the Aegon camp soon. So, this trek is not something that she had initially, she wasn't supposed to be involved in this leg of the journey. This was not supposed to include her at all, and she insists on coming. And she really has to convince Tokval to... I was going to say to let her come, but honestly that feels like it's giving him all the power in the moment. She has to convince him that her accompanying them is the smart choice. She's coming whether he says yes or not. But she wants him to understand her perspective of this. And she says, I have to go because they won't respect their future queen if she waits by the sea to be rescued. Can you imagine? A princess of Dara sitting in her comfortable ship ordering the Aegon Pecutasa to risk his life for her? That will confirm every terrible prejudice they already harbor about Dara and the stories about Admiral Krita. And honestly, it hadn't occurred to me that summoning him in that way would be a bad look, because I hadn't really thought ahead enough to see how they were going to wind up finding the Aegon. And when she puts it like that, and we know how the initial contact from Dara to all of these people actually went the first time, she is not wrong at all. So they look at each other in this moment, and I like this. He knelt on one knee and placed both hands atop the other knee, a gesture reserved for intimates who also commanded high respect. Princess of Dara, you are as precious to me as Aefir was to Kikisabo. Have we heard that legend? I don't remember Aefir and Kikisabo, and I feel like that's a reference to something that the audience is supposed to know. So forgive me for forgetting, but if anybody wants to refresh me, go ahead. So at the high, the zenith of the sun every day, they wind up having to make camp because it's just too fucking hot. It's dangerous, actually dangerous. And as somebody who is living in Texas right now and experiencing 111 degree days, I can't imagine. It is really wild being somewhere where the heat gets like this. I have never, I've lived in Texas now for 7 years, and the heat this year is beyond anything I have seen. And we took a walk the other night. It was literally 9:30 p.m. And we wait to go for a walk until after the sun is down, but there's still some light in the sky. And we stepped outside, and I'm thinking that it's going to be a little bit cooler, and it wasn't. And I checked the temperature, and it was still 101. And I just had to stop and be like, are we really, do we live here? Why? Why do we live here? 101 degrees at 9:30 p.m. I've never been out that late in that kind of heat. I've never experienced it before. I've experienced over 110 degrees several different places, but not in the middle of the night, never. And it's just a wild feeling. So anyway, this trek is rough because they are running out of water, and it turns out Tokval hasn't really accounted for how much slower they're going to be traveling, because none of these people are experienced with this sort of journey. So, even the people that are of his people, he's like, I am somebody who has gone through this, but they were Garinifin riders. They don't do this, so they don't even have the sort of experience that we would need. And the description of the water skins and carrying them, the only time I've ever done a multi-day hike was in Guatemala, and we had to carry these huge, those Poland Spring, I think an actual gallon, but it's made in a water bottle shape and it's really long. And we had those giant, like, netting water bottle holders on either side of our backpacks. And every single person had to carry 2 of them. And that on top of, like, your camp equipment and your clothing and the food, it got really heavy. So when you first put your pack on, you were just like, oh my God, this weighs so much. And then as you began to drink the water down, part of you was like, oh, thank God it's getting lighter. But then there would be a point in the day where you were like, oh no, it's almost all gone. And the comfort that you were taking in carrying less weight would start to be like very upsetting. And there were places that we could refill bottles, but they were not frequent. So we had to be pretty careful about rationing our water as well. And sometimes people would use it to like wash their face and stuff because there was no water to do that. And we had to be so careful about it. So that's the only experience that I have with anything like this. We never actually ran out of water. We did have all of our food stolen by dogs in the middle of the night one time. But, and my clothing and my hiking shoes were also taken. And I wound up having to wear water shoes for the remainder of it. And it was absolute hell. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I think about it all the time as like, it is probably the only thing of that type of hard, if that makes sense, that I will ever do. I don't see myself putting myself through that again, anything like it. But I'm really glad I did it once so that I have some frame of reference for any kind of journey like this, because otherwise I would genuinely have no idea what this feels like. And even though my feelings of it are very different and very cushiony, really, in comparison, there were some places where we could have hopped on a bus and finished our trip, and we didn't. But there was the option. It still makes me happy that I have like any sort of experience that I can connect to moments like this in books. I talked about this in more depth in the Song of Ice and Fire episode, I think a couple months ago. So check that out if you're interested. But anyway, Thorio, who is suffering now because she drank the water too quickly earlier, Thera comes and like gives some of the last of her water to her and is like, just from now on, drink when I drink. If you can't keep track of your steps, just do it when I do it, and then you'll know. And there is this cactus that they're collecting the juice from, and they filter it because apparently I don't know if it's straight up poisonous or if it's a hallucinogen, which is certainly possible, but they have to filter it in order to make it drinkable. And it says, Tokval sprinkled it into a powder made from crushed blood coral. The shamans believed that the powder could remove poison, and the people of the scrublands used it to make the water obtained from cacti potable. I always assume whenever there's a detail like this in these books that this is based on something that's real, because that's what he does. Ken Liu is like all about taking actual science, modern science, and sort of retroactively turning it into something. Sometimes he's genuinely just like, no, that was the folk medicine of the day, and it turned into modern science eventually. Sometimes it was never, the technology that people were working with at any given time, but he is doing it for the sake of the story. And I'm really curious about this, like, coral and whether or not this is something that is actually used this way. So it turns out it's still not great for you. He says later on that even if they were able to find a lot more cacti and strain them all, that wouldn't help them because they would wind up getting sick from it. They still need regular water. And there's a moment here where Thera, she's drinking the juice out of a bowl that's made from a skull. And she is kind of creeped out by it, but acknowledges that they're much more practical because the bone tools that they use are really, really light. And it never really occurred to me about bone being so much lighter, but also later on somebody talks about a hide pot. And that fascinated me as well. I think of a pot as being something that you can use over a fire. And I have to assume that that's how it's used and that it's simply made of hide. But I imagine something like that being really flammable, and clearly it's not. So just the idea of using certain materials for tools that wouldn't occur to me, because I would assume that they don't really fit the bill in terms of either strength or, in this case, flammability. I would love to know how a hide pot gets made, and if they have to coat it in something in particular, like it must be treated, or if it's just over time and slow usage, it gets hardened by being put over a fire, and that's part of what makes it strong. I don't know, but I was really interested in that and this deal with the bones. Especially because there's this moment where we find out that she is not cool with hunting or fishing. She wept over the slaughtering of animals. Once the animals were dead, she did not resist the process of butchering and cleaning or making use of their parts afterward. And this is something that I find really interesting. And I know that it's very easy, a lot of people do this, to sort of accuse folks who don't want to slaughter animals of being a hypocrite. Basically, like, if you eat meat, but you're unwilling to kill an animal, then you're in denial about where your meat comes from. I don't buy it. It takes a certain kind of person to slaughter an animal. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can do any particular job. And this is just another kind of job. And of course, slaughtering animals sometimes is going to attract terrible people who enjoy pain and do bad things. But I don't think if you slaughter animals for a living, that makes you an inherently bad person. And if you're able to slaughter an animal, that makes you somehow heartless. I do understand being able to butcher an animal and see that as separate from actually taking the animal's life. Personally, I think that I could get to a point where I could slaughter animals and be okay with it. I'm certainly not there now, but I feel like I can be very cold and practical when I need to be. But I understand very, very well her feeling on this. And there's something really interesting here. When Thera asks her if she is bothered by being surrounded by tools made of the bones of these animals, she says, holding on to the bones helps me keep them alive in my head. And something about that was so beautiful to me. I was really touched by it. I don't know if it's just the overall concept of continuing to honor something that has given its life. And I say given its life, and that feels like a euphemism because its life was taken. You know, it didn't get up and lay on the chopping block and go, for you, anything. It was taken. But nevertheless, continuing to appreciate that sacrifice and be like, yes, we ended a life, and it is continuing to help us even now. I really like that, and it makes me a little bit sad knowing how rare it is to use all the parts of an animal these days. They will make use of a lot of stuff in manufacturing, but we don't have a connection to that. And I sort of wonder what it would be like to be more connected with it. And then it's followed by Indara. Butchering, tanning, and all the mortuary arts were seen as necessary, but unclean and unlucky. While Thorio spoke Dara like a native, she had none of the taboos and prejudices of Dara. She had wanted Thorio to come not only because taking care of her made her feel like she was also taking care of Farah, but because she thought the girl served as a useful reminder that there was more than one way of looking at any aspect of the world. And I really like that. If any of you have spent time around either just kids in general or if you work in a particular industry and you have contact with brand new people to that industry, it can be so jarring when somebody says something that is a concept you wouldn't even have considered, because your experience sort of winds up boxing you in over time. So you lose that elasticity of concept and imagination. And that's not a criticism. It's just part of what happens when something becomes a job and you have to stop looking at it as necessarily a thing to be creative with, but as a job that I have to get done within a given amount of time. And I remember like a couple of different jobs that I did that were creative where people were like, well, why don't you do it this way? And I would open my mouth to explain why we didn't, and realize as I was opening my mouth that there wasn't a good reason. It just, we didn't do it that way. And for so many people, that's the end of the conversation. Oh, that's not how it's done. And, you know, this is part of why young blood being introduced can be a really good thing. And that's not to say that when you're younger, your ideas are inherently fresher and better, because obviously experience definitely counts for something. It's valued because it's meaningful, but it can sort of hamstring you. And I think sometimes about projects that I have worked on in the past when I was a teenager, and the way that I approached them, and realized that it wouldn't even enter my mind to approach them that way anymore, because I don't have that freedom in my mind. I am hemmed in a little bit, and I miss that sort of anything is possible kind of mentality. Something that I've noticed a lot the more I read, especially for Spoil Me. The ideas that some of these authors come up with are so wild to me. And the kinds of imagination that you have to employ in order to come up with these concepts and these, you know, either magical systems or the way that a world works, or just the culture, and you know what I mean? So anyway, this is all just me lamenting my narrow-mindedness as I get older. And I'm much more open-minded than many people, but I have to really work at it. So this is when Talkval comes in, and it's just like, something is wrong. Like, we are behind. And we find out that actually they aren't as far away as he thought. They wind up getting to the settlement a lot sooner than he expected. They crest this hill, and they're preparing to like walk for another half day and then make camp. And when they crest the hill, there it is, and they can see it, and it's only like an hour's walk away. But initially, they're really beginning to sort of panic. And when they start talking about what to do for the water situation, there's this like suggestion that Thera takes for granted he is about to make. You're going to suggest that Thorio and I take all the remaining water and head east, leaving the rest of you behind to fend for yourselves. Since there's not enough water to get everyone to the camp, you're going to propose a sacrifice. Why, Thorio? asked Talkval, his voice preternaturally calm. If you're proposing a sacrifice, you always make yourself part of it. And you want Thorio to come along because you were prepared for exactly the scenario where you couldn't make it to your home. Although Thorio is no help in finding water or food, and she can't carry much of a load, she speaks Aegon now like a native. Even with all my practice, I can't express myself perfectly in your tongue. She can act as my interpreter. And he starts laughing. And she's like, what the fuck? This isn't funny. And he's like, no, I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at the fact that, yeah, that did all cross my mind, and it was sort of like the original plan, but I'm not going to say that we should do that. And she's like, wait, what? And he says, do you think after all this time together, if you've learned how I think, I haven't learned how you think? And I really liked that moment. This is something that I want represented more in depictions of relationships in fiction is people knowing one another this well. So much of fiction, especially when it comes to relationships, there are conflicts generated out of misunderstandings or assumptions that the partners make about one another that are super wrong. And while I won't lie, that fucking happens. I know Owen really well by now. And I will still think, oh, he's thinking XYZ about something. And I'll approach him as if that's his mindset and he's fucking baffled because that's not how he was thinking at all. That is in regards to certain uncommon topics. But then there are things that I can predict down to the formulation of his sentence, exactly what he is going to say in response to. Like, there, you grow to know somebody that well, and you know some of their automatic tendencies, whether they're going to react with humor or with anger, whether they're somebody who's super thoughtful or can be glib and sort of dismissive about things. You just know. And whenever I read or watch things where the conflict comes from people misunderstanding one another on really fundamental levels, I can't help but be like, how are these people even in a relationship together? Because they don't trust one another at all. And they don't seem to understand each other. And that just feels like, well, now I don't really want to root for you two because I don't feel like you belong together. And this moment where he has already figured out how she's going to react and is like, I'm just not even going to say that because I know you won't do it. It's growth. It's a really nice, it's a depiction of how close the two of them are getting, where I think some authors would just be like, oh, I'm just going to have them sleep together. And that's going to be them getting close, you know? So anyway, they have this really funny moment the next morning where Thorio is like, well, maybe if I don't pee, I won't need to drink water anymore. Which, bitch, I fucking wish. I'm well known, I think, from various podcasts and various rants. Peeing is a scam. The whole idea that you have to consume water and then express it and then consume it and then express it and then consume it and then and just over and over and over endlessly. It's just, I hate it. And I understand why. That it's clearing things out of our systems, that it's helpful to our, yeah. Okay, fine. What it is that I wish I was a robot. I want to not require these things. But what can you do? But this moment of her just being like, well, if I just don't pee, I was like, tried it. Doesn't work. You just wind up having a painful bladder. And so then she's like, well, what if we just drink our pee? And Dara is like, oh my God, where did you even get such a gross idea? And she says, is it really gross? And Thera has to sort of stop and be like, well, and Tokval chimes in and is like, it's not just gross. It doesn't fucking work. Urine is toxic and it'll kill you. And then she's like, okay, but we filter the cactus water. Why can't we just filter our pee? And all of a sudden, when she mentions the condensation of the seawater in the hold that she was drinking, Thera is like, wait a second. And they figure out how to distill the urine using skins and putting them in the sun until there's the evaporation. And it is really interesting to watch the way that this is done. I'm not going to get into the details of it because in the end, it doesn't matter too much. But Thera comes up with most of this because she knows about the fundamentals of distillation. And Tokval comes up with the use of bone to regulate the temperature. And because he's like, you need it to be cool in order for the condensation to happen. And it turns out that that is the tactic that is used by Garinophins to keep the mounds of where eggs are buried cool. The thinner bones heat up in the sun faster than the thick bone at the center, so the hot air is pushed out and the inside cooled by fresh air coming down the chimney. I've watched hundreds of Garrinifins build breathing mounds like this to keep their eggs cool until the mothers are ready to incubate. Of course, they do it by digging tunnels instead of using bone, and I've heard that ant mounds work the same way. So they managed to do it, and I love that Thorio is the first one to take a gulp and is just like, it's fine. It tastes perfectly fresh. It doesn't taste like anything. And everybody else is like, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't. Which really I sympathize with. I have a pretty low threshold for gross out, and I don't think I could do it either. And she basically has to be like, all right, so are the Liuku, the Aegon, or the Dara the biggest pussies? Interesting. Wonder who. And then everybody is like, all right, give me some. So yeah, it winds up being a very successful experiment. And this is when they crest the hill and they see that the settlement is really close. And the next chapter, 13, is titled An Unwelcome Welcome. And Volyu, who is Takval's uncle, is greeting them, and he is aggro. This guy isn't open to this arrangement at all. First, he wants to shame Thera, and he knows that people from Dara cannot stomach Kjofir. But there's also the tradition that you have to drink at the same pace as your host, or else you're being rude to them. And he drains this huge skull, a bull skull, and shows her that it's empty, and then is like, all right, now your turn. And she takes a sip, and it says, merely sipped it before tipping the skull bowl toward Volyu. Starlight and firelight glinted off the brimming liquid. And he's like, oh wow, you're so delicate. It's fine, sweetheart. Take your time. We understand. And he's really like contemptuous of her. And she doesn't keep drinking and lets the silence stretch on. And everybody starts to get deeply agitated. And what I really enjoy about moments like this, whether it's in fiction or real life, is a moment when you realize how completely ingrained a certain cultural norm is, that a person doing something different is seen as wildly disrespectful and or rude. And sometimes you have to step back and look at the fact that you think that and go, wow, I was really taught that in a way that sank in, I guess, because I'm having a very strong reaction to them doing this. And there really isn't objectively a reason for me to be responding this way, which is part of the reason that, like, as I learn what customs and stuff, what kinds of rules there were to etiquette at the table and stuff in the past, I'm always startled, because I'm like, I would have really horrified everybody around me. There are so many things about the intricacies of table manners that I didn't understand and still really don't, and were completely de jour to everybody at the time. Anybody who was like well educated anyway. And this moment of her just not picking it back up and drinking, it causes them to really get angry with her and take it like as an offense. And Takval is getting more and more desperate to make her do it, and is like, what are you doing? You are going to completely ruin everything. And it's remarkable that if she doesn't drink this drink, then their treaty could be completely null just because of this. But that's how it works. So yeah, he's like, you can vomit later, but if you don't finish this, everybody is going to see it as an insult. And she says he's trying to assert dominance over me. It had not escaped her notice that Volyu had emphasized in his toast that she was alone, and made no mention of the proposed alliance between Dara and the Aegon. So, what she does here is because he, of course, has to confront her and be like, are you really that delicate? Or do you just think that you are so high and mighty that you don't need to deign to subscribe to our customs when you're in our presence? And she's looking at him and assessing him here. The man was in his early 50s, gaunt and hunched over in his posture, as though perpetually cringing from some blow that was about to be dealt. The oasis allowed his tribe to survive, but not to thrive, and years of hiding in the wasteland had drained him of the warrior's vigor that he might once have inherited from his father. Though he was not ancient, his face was already so lined that it was hard to read his expression in the dim fire glow. The princess knew better than to underestimate this man. He was the sole surviving son of the Aegon royal line, and there was no doubt that his calculated performance of the role of cringing coward had been useful in his survival. And she doesn't know at this point how incredibly on point that is. It's almost a throwaway observation, and it turns out to be low-key his entire personality and the way that he has handled literally everything. So she says, I only took a sip out of great respect for both our peoples. And she's talking about the alliance and the marriage. I wish to honor the gods and give them a sign that the friendship between our people should last as long as this bowl of Kjofir. And a bunch of other people are approving. The crowd in general reacts favorably to this. Women are saluting her. And even Takval is like, all right, actually, not bad. And Volyu is like, oh my God, that's good. Wow. You even almost convinced me, but I see that you are full of shit. And she's like, I can't believe that you would insult a guest like that. And he's like, look, you may be a guest, but you're over here presuming that we're allies. I have never even fucking met you. My nephew arranged all of this without getting approval from me. And you're acting like we're buds? I don't know you like that. And that's insulting to me. No matter how pretty your words or how elaborate your false reasoning, the only thing that matters is power. An alliance can only occur between peoples who can make each other stronger. And she starts to be like, well, we have weapons, we have wealth. And he says, I'm sorry, but Takval has told me that you've only brought 1,000 people, and you have these little ships that you can't even fit a Garinnafin on. And the last time that we got visited by Admiral Krita, he had city ships, and we still beat him. I am not impressed with you. This isn't a threat, and this isn't a display of power. It's a pathetic attempt by a bunch of people who have no other options left. And Thera is like, oh shit. Because she can't lie. She's completely aware that this is low-key exactly what's happening. When she tries to interrupt him and says, surely you can see, he says, let me tell you what I see. I see a people on the verge of ruin as they face the prospect of conquest by the Liuku, like a flock of sheep about to be slaughtered by the wolves. I see a woman desperate for one last chance to save her people. Though I never met Krita and his lords of Dara, tales of his arrogance and confidence are known to every shaman in the scrublands. Your people never would have agreed to send you out here across an unknown ocean to marry someone you consider a savage unless you have run out of options. You need us, but we don't need you. And I was like, oof, I don't like this guy. I don't like his whole vibe and attitude. But he is dead fucking right. He is. I can't even be mad. So at this point, he says to Tokfal, Tokfal says she can help us. I've seen what she can do. And he says, oh, I have no doubt you've seen what she can do. Or imagined it. You've brought home a feral Garinafin who is unbroken and unused to being ridden. I must tame her. And Tokfal starts to get very upset. His face gets really red. He almost like lunges for him. And Thera tells him to chill. And he's like, you don't understand what he is doing. And she says, I may not get it, but I also know that you are not in the position to fight this fucking guy. But she doesn't think about the wording. And I am assuming that because she interprets it later. She says, let him ride. So she understands the words and she's repeating it back to Tokfal. But she isn't thinking about what the implications of this are in a way that felt almost out of character to me because it seemed really, really obvious. And that was the main problem that I had, was how long this goes on and Thera isn't putting two and two together in a way that this feels extremely obvious to me. And it seems like she's getting most of this translation. There's no indication in the text that she's only catching every other word. When she tells him, just let him ride, it's fine, she uses the same words that he used himself back to Tokfal. So this was the only part where I was kind of like, why isn't she getting it? It's obvious what he means by this. Even if he didn't mean marriage, it could just mean that he's going to try and sleep with her, which would still be off the table. So she stops here anyway, and she is thinking over how to handle this. And she decides to go in a completely different direction. She pours the Kjofjær on the ground. And then when she begins to speak, she does so softly that everybody has to quiet in order to hear her, which is like an actual negotiation tactic that you can read about in like modern text. And she says, I drink only with heroes, not cowards who usurp the seat of heroes. I call upon the spirits of the great Pekyus of the past. And she names all of these people and all of their accomplishments, and everybody's watching her. And she says, I'm not going to waste it. I'm pouring it out as a memory to them. And he's like, how would it be wasting it to drink it with me? And she basically is like, you talk about power and subservience, and your little band of sad followers are crouching out in the desert, barely scraping by. You don't even call yourself Pekyu because you're too afraid of the repercussions of that getting out. You are out here in fear still, but you're trying to stunt on me like you've got the upper hand and can offer or do anything. You are pitiful. And it's gone on a long time. If you were just biding your time until you could like make a move, you would have done it. But if this is how you're still living, guess what? This is how you live. And that's it. And when he says, we have never ceased to resist the cursed Liuku, but the clever wolf bides his time. Do not attempt to clothe yourself in the courage of others. Tokfal has told me of the many failed uprisings, and you've never been the leader of any of these rebellions. Every time the rebels were crushed by the Liuku, you stood by and did nothing. And again, he's like, I was waiting for the right opportunity. And she says, leaders don't wait. They plan and plot and craft until they seize the opportunity. What have you done to strengthen yourself? Absolutely nothing. I didn't come here because the time is right. but because Tokval dared to brave the trackless sea to find me. He is 10 times the warrior you are. You have been fooling yourself that standing still is the same thing as making progress, that lying down in submission is the same as plotting revenge, that telling those who dare to fight that the time isn't right is the same as seeking out the opportunity for a fatal strike. You've yielded so much of your pride and strength, you don't even call yourself by your title. That's a birthright. You have turned your people into a flock of sheep, with you as a sheepdog for the Liuku. And again, she doesn't know how completely correct she is when she's saying this. This is a tactic she's using based on sheer observation and goading and an attempt at showmanship to get these people on her side so that he's shamed into doing what she's proposing. But when we find out how this works from Tokval's mom later, it turns out she is so correct that it's almost eerie. So anyway, he tries to do the whole, I was just testing you, yada, 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 which honestly is so weak. And then he interrupts and says, a young pilot is impulsive. An experienced pilot can teach his mount much that she does not yet know she needs to know. And again, it's clearly the two of them going back and forth, Tokval and Volyu, about Thera, but she's not fucking getting it. So she tells Tokval, let him do this. What matters is that he supports it. And Tokval is like, are you sure? And as we find out later, he has real feelings for her. He's been singing her praises to his mom. So it's not just a moment of him being like, wow, I didn't think you would go this far. It's also, wow, I don't mean anything to you. I'm a piece for your accomplishments. Okay, I kind of thought that wasn't it, but I guess it is. And it's just it just feels a little out of character that she's not figuring this out. So she's in her tent and she is talking to Tokval. Or no, she's waiting for him, and then he comes in and says, do you think we've made a good start? And she says, we have. You mentioned our goals earlier. What are they? To save Dara and to free the Aegon by destroying the Liuku, of course. Tokval looked into her eyes. Are these goals worth sacrificing for? And she's like, do you think I'm not willing to sacrifice? And he says, I don't mean in a general sense. I mean about you. And she says, I've already given up all I had to sail across the ocean with you to come here. And he says, then remember your goals and come what may, do what you must. And she says, what are you talking about? And he doesn't answer her. He just tells her the chief wants to visit you. And again, she remarks that it's the middle of the night, but she's not figuring it out. So Volyu comes in, checks to make sure she's ready for the wedding the next day, and whether or not this is like cool with her, but doesn't spell it out enough for her to understand what's happening. And then he mentions about how they're in exile and they don't have a lot that they can do to make this as grand as it should be, but we're going to do our best. And he says, also, you should know that Tokval has kind of destabilized things a little bit. My sister and I don't really get along. Tokval had indeed told her that Volyu had become chief of the Aegon in exile over the claim of his sister, though neither had been formally acknowledged by Nobo, their father. Most of the Aegon warriors now seemed to accept Volyu as their leader, but it made sense that Solian would still have supporters, especially among those unsatisfied with Volyu. And essentially what he's saying is like, I need you to be prepared to stand up to her. And she says, oh yeah, I'm not trying to make any more trouble than we need to. You're the Pekyu, and we need to be united in order to achieve what we're going to do. So I'm not going to tolerate anything. And he says, all right, well, that's exactly what I want to hear. And he lets her know she's probably going to be up most of the night learning like the ceremony that they'll have to go through. And then she gets visited by Takval's mother, who is pretty aggressive because she thinks that this woman is like a cold-hearted bitch that she's dealing with. And so she comes in to talk to Thera like, all right, what the fuck? In the kind of way that parents do when somebody is apparently mistreating their kid. And this is like really interesting to me. So I'm going to read part of this. I am called Solian Aragaz, daughter of Nobo Aragaz, son of Akiga Aragaz, once the pride of the Scrublands. I'm Takval's mother. And we get a little history. The last Pekyu of the Aegon had fathered dozens of children by his multiple wives. After the Liuku had successfully overthrown their masters, Pekyu Tenryo Roatan gathered all the children and grandchildren and basically bashed all their heads in. And when people were like protesting, he says, you think I'm cruel, but I'm being merciful. Leaving them alive so that their hearts would be gnawed daily by the shame of their own cowardice would be true cruelty. Once the Aegon tribes, scattered to the ends of the Scrublands, had settled into their new role as a conquered people, rumors began to spread that not all the members of the first family had died. And that's Volyu and Solian. And everybody starts to like try to hunt them down, but it's not even because they matter necessarily. Pekyu's thanes, Pekyu Tenryo, his thanes are like, oh, you need to go and fucking track them. And Tenryo is like, no, it's fine because I can let everybody else deal with trying to track them down and use them as like this sort of nebulous threat that helps unite us, actually. And he says, as long as the Liuku knew where Volyu and Solian were, they were content to let the Aegon fight over these useless figureheads. So this is when we get the actual story of what has happened since then. Let's see, I'm trying to find the spot. Okay, so first of all, she's talking about how Takval came in and told her, he talked about you as a woman more beautiful than 1,000 sunsets, as wise as Aethir herself. He was so busy telling me about you that I don't believe he even asked after my health. And all of a sudden, Thera, who's been sort of approaching this in a diplomatic frame of mind, realizes that this lady is talking to her as a mother-in-law, wanting to know, what are you doing? And so she says, I'm doing what I think is best. I really care about your son, and this matters to me, and he's important to me. And eventually they get to the point, and her mother's like, then why are you going to marry my brother? And Thera is like, what? Why am I what now? And it takes a minute, and finally Takval's mother is like, okay, you genuinely didn't know. I thought you were just fucking turning your back on him. In order to marry my brother, he has to go into exile, by the way. And he has already started. He's already left. And Thera is like, what the fuck is going on? And Thera loses it. And is like, I'm not some talisman to be passed around between him and his uncle. And Solian is like, all right, see, yes, this is the vibe. That's what I was looking for. Appreciate it. I'm going to tell you about my brother. Our mothers were Liuku slaves, and so among the Aegon we were considered tainted, not truly the heirs of the Aragaz lineage at all. Later, after the fall of the Aegon, we became symbols, little more than ceremonial weapons. As we grew older, that power attributed to us became real. As we performed the ceremonial rites wanted by whichever chief controlled us at the moment, we also took care to cultivate the elders and chieftains around us. Volyu played one faction against another until we were finally able to build a base of power. With the help of warriors loyal to us, we escaped and established our own tribe, and the other chiefs found it more advantageous to curry our favor, and thereby gain prestige, than to dominate us outright as they used to. Once we established our independence, Volyu and I both knew attention from the Liuku was inevitable. My thought was to seek refuge far from Tatin, to take those chieftains and Naros loyal to us and build a new life far away. And Thera is saying you wouldn't seek justice. And Solian is like, what the fuck does justice even mean at this point? Everything is kill another person, kill that person. Like, survival is the only real thing. Let's be perfectly honest. And then says, but my brother had a very different concept. He thought there was nowhere we could be safe unless we made ourselves useful. We settled here. To the chieftains who followed us, he delivered many rousing speeches about how it was important to plot for the long game, to bide our time until the Aegon people could rise up against the hated Liuku overlords. But in secret, he followed another plan. The Liuku exacted heavy tribute. And in the winter, when it was particularly barren, or the summers were particularly harsh and dry, sometimes people would begin to starve. And the Liuku Thanes, who were meant to be keeping watch over us, would humiliate those under their command. In those cases, the desperate tribes would decide to raise the banner of rebellion, and it was the custom for the rebelling chiefs to seek our blessing. Beyond appeasing the shamans, these visits also served the purpose of probing our willingness to support the rebellion. Volyu would nod in sympathy and perhaps even pledge to counsel the other tribes to rebel in support. But as soon as the rebel chiefs left, grateful for the support of the Aragaz clan, Volyu would spread rumors against the would-be rebels, raising doubts about the chiefs' characters, making up prophecies that they were doomed to fail. When confronted directly by those who wondered if they should join the rebels, he would give ambivalent answers, making everyone hesitate. Worst of all, he would secretly dispatch messengers to Tatin, reporting to Tenryo all he had learned from the rebels. Thus, when the rebellions finally began, the tribes found themselves devoid of allies and surrounded by Liuku troops, who had appeared as if by magic. Volyu would then mourn the rebels and cry in front of the next gathering of the tribes, vowing vengeance, but explaining that the time wasn't yet ripe. He would then demand the tribes raise an extra large tribute for Tatin, which he collected and sent on to Tenryo after keeping 1/10 of the goods. He explained these tributes as a way to shield the innocent from suspicion. This is truly so gross. Just so gross. And again, Thera had no idea how absolutely correct she was when she was like denouncing him in front of everyone, which is, I think, part of why he caves so quickly. He knows that she's a little too close to the truth and that maybe people are going to start putting it together. And basically Takval's mom is like, I just thought you should know who you're going to fucking marry. And Thera's like, yeah, about that. So they find a way to take a Gerinifin and sneak out. They make up some story and Thera poses as a fucking kid of the tribe. And they find Takval, who hasn't got any supplies because he clearly was walking out into the desert to die. Because Takval has no problem sacrificing himself. We have learned this. If anything, he's a little bit too fucking eager to do it. And he is just like, the only thing I could do was challenge him. And she's like, well, then you should have. And he's like, you told me not to. You said saving Dara meant everything to you. And Thera is like, oh my God, how could you think that I would do this? I actually care about you. To which he says, I didn't know that. And I don't think you would have told me if it weren't for the situation we are in now. And Thera is sort of brought up short, realizing oh my God, maybe I know, maybe that's true. Realizing like she hasn't shared of herself really or been vulnerable. And as somebody who has problems with that myself, I fucking sympathize, Sarah. It is a wild moment when you realize that you have been like having a really strong feeling and never expressed it, and the person has no idea. So what they do is basically it's a coup that is done so quickly and quietly that it's way over before anybody even realizes. Tokval wants to kill him. And Thera is like, we can't. If we start things off with murdering him, these people aren't ever really going to be on our side. And it's also like bad luck for our marriage to start that way. We aren't actually strong enough for a confrontation. I know that your uncle is notorious for being like, oh, it's not the right time. But like genuinely, it isn't the right time. And if we want everybody to work together and get stronger, we all need to be united in a way that won't happen if we kill him. So they go and talk to him, and Volyu is like, well, what makes you think that I'm just going to keep quiet about all of this? And Thera says, you've made it clear the only thing you care about is yourself. And if you report us, you'll be blamed. How could you trust you if he learned that your sister and nephew had both rebelled and that you were so incompetent you allowed them to get away? Surely he would think you were conspiring with them. And if Kuju somehow didn't blame you, your own people would not let you off so easily. Remember, Solyan is at least as respected as you are. If our departure had her blessing, and the Liuku then caught us, no one would believe your claims about the gods not favoring us. Thus, the most advantageous path for you is to keep our secret. And Volyu was like, well, we can't keep the secret forever. They'll find out. And Thera's like, yeah, but by then, we should be strong enough to handle it. The longer you keep your secret, the stronger we'll get, the better the chances of the rebellion. And when that happens, you'll be such a hero and you'll have all this power. And finally, he's like, all right, yeah, that's legit. So we'll do that. And later on, Tokval is like, okay, I really did want to kill him, but now that I see the way this is all shaking out, you're right. This was the way to go. As the line of Aegon warriors began to march to the west, Tokval, Thera, Solyan, and a few close companions mounted 2 Garinifins, gifts from the suddenly generous Volyu, who couldn't wait to get them out of Silyusaki, I think is how I'm saying. I think I'm saying that right. The decision to scuttle the ships was debated, but ultimately everyone agreed it was the only choice. There was no way to maintain these ships if they were to set up their base far in the east, and leaving the ships around risked exposing their arrival to the Liuku. And there's just a moment when they're scuttling them and sinking them that Thera is realizing, I'm going to be away from home a lot longer than I thought. Watching their means of escape, essentially, sinking is a real moment for her. And Tokval says, do you want to send a care package to your family? And she's like, what does that mean? And he teaches her how to do the thing with the like cactus juice to engrave on the turtle shells. And they have live turtles that they have engraved a message onto. And essentially, they're sending these turtles out with the hope that they will reach Dara and somebody will see one and realize that it's a message. And it's written in a way that nobody who isn't of Dara will recognize that it's a message. So hopefully if one of these turtles gets caught by a Liuku, they won't think anything of it. But I just like the absolute chance that it takes for this to work. I mean, it will work because that's how these books are. But it feels like just screaming into like the void to me, you know? And after they do this, there's a moment of a heart to heart with the two of them. And her saying, because he says, I know that you loved her. I'm sorry. And she says, my heart has grown to make a place for you. It isn't a fixed pool. And I won't stop loving her, but that doesn't mean that I haven't started loving you. And then she whispers something to him, and he looks excited and puts his hand on her belly. So she's apparently preggo. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, we have reached the end of part 2. We're going to be starting part 3. Rain Lashed Saplings is the name of part 3. I'm so excited. We're getting into a stretch here of really consistent episodes. I'll be covering a lot closer together, so I won't forget things in between as easily. Not that I won't forget things at all, because these are dense as fuck, and I will forget things, but it'll be a little bit easier to keep track, hopefully. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. But yeah, thank you again, Kyle, very much for commissioning this, for introducing me to the series. It's super fun. Hope that you guys are enjoying the coverage. Thank you, Ms. T, for being here. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.